What's up everybody, this is Danny. I hope everyone is staying safe out there. Today I'm bringing you the camera comparison between the LG V60 thinq and the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus. So I didn't want to stack it up with the Ultra because the V60 comes in at a much lower price, so this just made more sense. Let me know what video looks better, let me know what stabilization looks like, and also let me know which microphone sounds better, and then I'm going to test out all the different conditions and let you know if the V60 can knock out the S20 Plus in a camera comparison. Let's do this. Before we get started, let's talk about the testing process. All of these pictures were taken on auto mode with HDR enabled, scene optimizer off, and all beauty modes were disabled. Both of these cameras do have a manual mode, so if you have time to tweak the settings to get that perfect shot, you can, but to keep things fair, I do it this way because I think it represents the average user best. Let's start with the daytime shots. As expected, any flagship device these days can take great pictures during the day, and no exceptions here. Colors are rich, dynamic range is great, sharpness and detail are both there, so for the most part, both of these cameras will produce a nice image in good lighting. But after looking at over 200 images side by side, here are the major differences that I noticed. The color replication is a little bit different. The V60 tends to lean towards the lighter blue in the sky. Neither of these cameras nailed it, I would say. The realistic color is somewhere in between, but this is all personal preference. Also, in general, the S20 Plus tends to create more contrasty pictures. I prefer this in a lot of the cases. The highlights are controlled better on the S20 Plus, and the overall pictures are just better balanced as a whole. There's less clipping on the brighter areas like this plant here, and if you just compare HDR to HDR, time and time again, the S20 Plus just ends up capturing the brighter overall scene with more vibrant colors and uniform exposure. Of course, you can just edit the V60 photo to make it look comparable, but straight out of the camera, I feel that the S20 Plus has an edge in a lot of the scenarios. If I had to pick one fault with the V60 during the day, it's the triggering of the auto HDR. Sometimes it just doesn't activate when it should, so you end up getting blown out backgrounds. So after this happened a bunch of times, I just forced the HDR to always on. I hope LG fixes this in a future software update. You might be thinking that the V60 shots in some scenarios look washed out, and that's because it tends to process with more shadow detail. You can just bring down the shadows if you edit your photos, and you can get it looking close to the S20 Plus, but straight out of the camera, it doesn't have the same balance as the S20 Plus does. Looking at the depth of field, both do a great job because they both have larger sensors this year. The difference is that the V60 uses a main 64 megapixel sensor with no secondary lens besides the ultra wide, plus a time of flight, where the S20 Plus uses the 12 megapixel as the main sensor, has a secondary 64 megapixel camera for a digital telephoto, and a ultra wide plus the time of flight, so the S20 Plus does have an extra sensor. When comparing the high resolution 64 megapixel captures, they both look really great with lots of detail. This is going to allow you to recrop to your heart's content without much quality loss. Look at the amount of cropping here. You can still see a lot of the detail even at 1000% crop, but after comparing, the S20 Plus does have the more detailed 64 megapixel capture. It's slightly sharper with a little bit more detail. It's not crazy different, but noticeable when cropping in heavy. But regardless, they are both great. When it comes to portrait mode on the V60, it uses the wide angle camera, and in some instances it can be advantageous so you can get that background blur even if you're farther away from the subject, but in most cases you do have to get way too close to that subject to get that desired focal length. I'm hoping that LG allows the user to use the main sensor for portrait mode in the future because I think it's a better look overall. You do have to get really close to the subject to take that portrait shot. When doing this comparison, it was pretty difficult. Let me know what you think in the comments about the natural roll-off and the background separation. Which one has the better natural bokeh? They do have a different look, so I think it's going to be personal preference. When it comes to macro photography, both of them do not have the best minimum focusing distance, so you can't get as close as you can on previous generations due to the larger sensor. You do get incredible depth of field, but the sacrifice is the narrow point of focus. The V60 does have worse minimum focusing distance because it uses that main 64 megapixel Sony sensor. The 12 megapixel on the S20 Plus does better, but if you shoot with that 64 megapixel mode on the S20 Plus, you will have this same issue. But the S20 Plus wins here on macro photography as a whole when it comes to the area of focus and sharpness. The S20 Plus also wins when it comes to the zoom. Both are all digital when it comes to zoom, but look at that 10x zoom. The S20 Plus just kills it in terms of detail and clarity, and you even have that 30x option if you need to get crazy, but I would just stick to the 10x. Let's take a look at the stabilization. Both have optical image stabilization and can both shoot up to 8K resolution video, but what you're seeing here is the 4K 30 frames per second. They are both doing well, but the S20 Plus seems to be smoother with less micro jitters. If you take your video off of your V60, it exports as an HDR file, Rec 2020 to be exact, and the colors just look absolutely wacky with hypersaturation, and that's because it's not converted back to the Rec 709 color space that we're used to seeing. Now, this is what it looks like when it's converted. It's so much better. Samsung has this figured out and always has, so you don't have to do any work, but on the LG, you will have to put in some work if you don't want it to look like this. They both do shoot in HDR10 plus, but here's what it looks like when you take it off of the phone. It looks flat with no color, but when you work with it, add a LUT and make some adjustments, the video can look incredible. If you want to see what the V60 8K camera can do, make sure you check out my full video. I'll leave a link to it. You'll definitely be impressed. The average consumer isn't going to be able to do this conversion and video editing, so I'm going to give the video win to the Galaxy S20 Plus. The last thing is the daytime selfies. LG and Samsung both do a nice job, but the LG tends to land on the warm side, but also has nice detail. I like the wider field of view on the S20 Plus front-facing camera better. It allows more to be in the frame. The V60 prioritizes skin for exposure, where I feel the S20 Plus is trying to balance the entire picture, so the dynamic range looks better on the S20 Plus. Sometimes it goes back and forth, but overall, I prefer the cooler tone and the contrast of the S20 Plus. So let's get to that low light performance. This is the test that I was looking forward to. My S20 Plus is the Korean unlocked Snapdragon model and has the latest software running on it, and the images have gotten a lot better since launch. In general, again, the V60 tends to land warmer on the white balance, sometimes too warm, and adds more saturation, so this will be a preference thing on which one that you like better. But if you look at all the pictures, you'll notice that the V60 shoots at a higher ISO, which makes for more shadow detail. You can see it especially in the clouds, so some might like that better, but that does come at an expense of more noise. When you punch in, you can see that noise pretty clearly. But look at the detail, the V60 is significantly sharper than the S20 Plus, which I was really surprised with. Take a look at this shot. The color temperature and saturation do look different, but at 400% crop, the people on the steps look much clearer on the V60, so kudos to LG on this. The good thing is that the noise pattern is uniform on the V60, so just like the daytime pictures where the shadow detail is bumped, you can just adjust the shadows when you edit the picture, and you can lose most of that noise without affecting the overall picture. So I wouldn't call this a deal breaker at all, because I believe this can be fixed in a firmware update. I just hope that LG gets better with software updates. They have not been the most reliable. The V60 also picks up a lot more of the green tones. Take a look at the clouds here. That's definitely not nice looking. The night mode does help it, but I think the S20 Plus looks better on the night mode scenarios. There is a slider on the V60, but don't go all the way up, because then you'll get this. The wide angle can also shoot in night mode, and they both look good, but I definitely prefer the S20 Plus's nighttime color and processing here. The images may be more detailed on the V60, but overall, the balance of highlights and exposure is better on the S20 Plus for the most part. Take a look at this light source here, but it wouldn't be a camera comparison if it didn't go back and forth. It's extremely saturated and warm on the shot, but the dynamic range is handled better. Just look at the store windows and look at the amount of detail difference here. It's really noticeable. Both of them don't handle reds well. The more accurate color, I guess, would be the V60, but the processing is weird on both of them. This wide angle is the best representation that I got from both of them. When it comes to the nighttime photos, I think it will come down to preference, but when we start looking at the video, the LG is looking weird when the stabilization is happening, so movement can make it look smeared, but when you don't move as much, it definitely clears up. The video on the S20 Plus is more colorful and also sharper if you look closely, but I do have to give it to the LG V60 on the noise reduction. It is much better, and zooming into that sky, you can clearly see the difference, but that noise reduction does come at a cost for slightly softer video, so let me know which one you prefer. Finally, the nighttime selfies, they both have nice detail with the beauty modes off. The portrait mode also works pretty well in moderate low light, but they definitely get soft when they go into darker conditions. The difference with the S20 Plus is that it has night mode for the front facing camera. This makes a huge difference, and the V60 is again landing warm with more saturation, but that night mode is a game changer. They look like two different pictures, but overall the S20 Plus ends up being sharper in most shots. The V60 just totally missed it here on this portrait shot, but once again, the detail and sharpness on night mode front facing camera is undeniable. So this camera comparison was made to help you make a buying decision, but both have their strengths and weaknesses. But if I had to pick a winner based off camera, it would be the Galaxy S20 Plus. I think the daytime shots are more balanced with better HDR algorithm and more flexibility with the greater zoom range, with the sharper 64 megapixel shots and the hassle-free 4K and 8K video. The nighttime is a toss-up on more detail versus less noise and color temperature preferences, and the video is also a toss-up since stabilization doesn't affect the videos much on the S20 Plus, but the noise reduction is superior on the V60. I have to say though, I'm impressed with the V60 being hundreds of dollars cheaper, up to $400 cheaper in this case, and still competing. But overall, I think if you're buying purely off camera quality alone, I would buy the S20 Plus. But if you're looking at the overall package though, and want that full manual video control, even with 8K video, with audio mode options and that headphone jack, the V60 is not a bad choice at all. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Subscribe for more content like this and hit that like button if you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one.